These mutual compliments, so like the caresses of the Romish whore, whereby she entices the nations to her fornication, between the professed servants of Christ and the vassals of Antichrist, if they be cordial, would seem to import that they are in a fair way of compounding their differences, and to accommodate their oppositions at length, which yet I hope will be irreconcilably maintained and kept up by all true Presbyterians, in whose name they have impudence to give out their address. But if they be only adulatory and flattering compliments, importing only a conjunction of tails, like Samson's foxes, with a disjunction of heads and hearts, tending towards distinct and opposite interests, then, as they would suit far better the dissimulations of politicians than the simplicity of gospel ministers, and do put upon them the brand of being men-pleasers rather than servants of Christ, so for their dissemblings with dissemblers, who know their compliments to be and take them for such, they may look to be paid home in good measure, heaped up and running over, when such methods shall be laid down as shall not be in the power of any to alter, when such designs shall be obtained by this liberty in these addresses, that the after-bought wit of the addresses shall not be able to disappoint. However, the address itself is of such address as makes the thing addressed for to be odious, and the addressers to forfeit the respect and merit the indignation of all that are friends to the Protestant and Presbyterian cause, as may appear from these obvious reflections. Firstly, it was needful indeed that they should have assumed the name of Presbyterians, though it might have been more tolerable to let them pass under that name, if they had not presumed to give forth their flatteries in the name of all of that persuasion, and to allege it was at their desire, which is either an illuding equivocation, or a great untruth, for though it might be the desire of the men of their own persuasion, which is a newly start-up opinion, that interest hath led them to espouse, yet nothing could be more cross to the real desires of true Presbyterians, that prefer the truth of the cause to the external peace of the professors thereof, and call it the humble address of Presbyterian ministers, for otherwise it could never have been known to come from men of the Presbyterian persuasion. Seeing the contents of this address are so clearly contrary to their known principles, it is contrary to Presbyterian principles to congratulate an anti-Christian usurper for undermining religion and overturning laws and liberties. It is contrary to Presbyterian principles to justify the abrogation of the national covenant in giving thanks for a liberty whereby all the laws are cast and disabled therein confirmed. It is contrary to Presbyterian principles to thank the king for opening a door to bring in popery, which they are engaged to extirpate in the Solemn League and Covenant. It is contrary to Presbyterian principles to allow or accept of such a vast toleration for idolaters and heretics, as is evident above from all their contendings against it, which is also contrary to the confession of faith generally owned by Presbyterians, as may be seen in the place forecited, chapter 20, part 4. It is contrary to Presbyterian principles to consent to any restrictions, limitations, or conditions binding them up in the exercise of the ministerial function, wherewith this liberty is loaded and clogged, whereby indeed they have the liberty of the public and peaceable exercise of it, without any hazard of present persecution, but not without great hazard of sin, and incurring the guilt of the blood of souls, for not declaring the whole counsel of God, which addressers cannot declare if they preserve an entire loyalty in their doctrine, as here they promise. Secondly, there is nothing here sounds like the old Presbyterian strain, neither was there ever an address of this title seen before from Presbyterian hands. I would have looked far more Presbyterian-like, instead of this address, to have sent a protestation against the now openly designed introduction of popery and subversion of all laws and liberties which they are covenanted to maintain, or at least to have given an address to the useful language of Presbyterians who used always to speak of the covenants and work of reformation. But here never a word of these, but of loyalty to his excellence, to his graciousness, to his sacred majesty, of loyalty not to be questioned, an entire loyalty in doctrine, a resolved loyalty in practice, and a fervent loyalty in prayers. And all that they are solicitous about is not left to the prerogatives of their master be encroached upon, and the liberties of the church be supplanted, and religion wronged, but lest their loyalty be questioned, and they be otherwise represented. And all that they beseech for is, not that the cause of Christ be not wronged, nor anti-Christian idolatry introduced by this liberty, but that these who promote any disloyal principles and practices may be looked upon as none of theirs, wherein all their encouragement is, that they persuade themselves from his Majesty's justice and goodness, that he will not give credit to any other information until he take due cognition thereof. Here is a lawless, unrestricted loyalty to a tyrant, claiming an absolute power to be obeyed without reserve, not only professed, but solicitously sought to be the principle of Presbyterians, whereas it is rather the principle of atheistical Hobbes, exploded with indignation by all rational men. This is not a Christian loyalty or profession of conscientious subjection to a minister of God for good, who is a terror to evildoers, but a stupid subjection and absolute allegiance to a minister of Antichrist, who gives liberty to all evil men and seducers. This is not the Presbyterian loyalty to the king, in the defense of Christ's evangel, liberties of the country, ministration of justice, and punishment of iniquity according to the national covenant, and in the preservation and defense of the true religion and liberties of the kingdoms according to the solemn league and covenant, but an Erastian loyalty to a tyrant in his overturning religion, laws, and liberties, and protecting and encouraging all iniquity. This loyalty and doctrine will be found disloyalty to Christ, in a sinful and shameful silence at the wrongs done to him, and not declaring against the invasions of his open enemies. This loyalty in practice is a plain betraying of religion and liberty, in lying by from all opposition to the open destroyer of both. And this loyalty in prayers for all blessings ever to attend his person and government will be found neither consonant to Presbyterian prayers in reference to Popish tyrants, nor consistent with the zeal of Christians and the cries of all the elect unto God, to whom vengeance belongs, against Antichrist and all his supporters, nor any way conformed to the saints' prayers in Scripture, nor founded upon any Scripture promises, to pray for a blessing to a papist tyranny, which cannot be of faith, and therefore must be of sin. It were much more suitable to pray that God, which hath caused his name to dwell in his church, may destroy all kings that shall put to their hand to alter and destroy the house of God. Ezra 6, verse 12. Thirdly, this address is so stuffed with sneaking flatteries that it would become more sycophants and court parasites than ministers of the gospel, and were more suitable to the Popish, Prelatical, and malignant faction to congratulate and rejoice in their professed patron and head, and fill the gazettes with their adulatory addresses, which heretofore used to be deservedly inveighed against by all dissenters, than for Presbyterians to take a copy from them and espouse the practice which they had condemned before, and which was never commended in any good government, nor never known in these British nations before Oliver's usurpation and Charles' tyranny. Flattery being always counted base among ingenuous men. But here is a rhapsody of flatteries from the deep sense they have of his Majesty's gracious and surprising favor, finding themselves bound in duty to offer their most humble and hearty thanks to his sacred Majesty, the favor bestowed being to them valuable above all earthly comforts. One would think this behooved to be a very great favor from a very great friend for very gracious ends. But what is it? In not only putting a stop to their long-said sufferings, which were some ground, indeed, if the way were honest, but this not only supposes and also, but what is that? But also granting us liberty, which is either a needless tautology, for if all sufferings were stopped, then liberty must needs follow, or it must respect the qualifications of the liberty, flowing from such a fountain, absolute power, through such a conveyance, the stopping all penal laws against papists, in such a form as a toleration, for such ends as overturning the Reformation and introducing popery. This is the favor for which they offer most humble and hearty thanks, more valuable to them than all earthly comforts, though it be manifestly intended to deprive the Lord's people at the long run of heavenly comforts of the preached gospel. Sure, if they thank him for the liberty, they must thank him for the proclamation whereby he grants it, and justify all his claim there to be absoluteness, being that upon which it is superstructed, and from which it emergeth, and so become a lifted faction to abet and own him in all his attemptings, engaged now to demean themselves, as that he may find cause rather to enlarge than to diminish his favors, which can be no other way but in assisting him to destroy religion and liberty, at least in suffering him to do what he will without control. Oh, what an indelible reproach is this for ministers, who pretend to be set for the defense of the gospel, thus to be found betraying religion, through justifying and magnifying a tyrant for his suspension of so many laws whereby it was established and supported. Fourthly, it were more tolerable if they went no further than flatteries. But I fear they come near the border of blasphemy when they say that the great God hath put this in his royal heart, which can bear no other construction but this, that the holy Lord hath put it in his heart to assume to himself a blasphemous and absolute power, whereby he stops and suspends all penal laws against idolaters, and gives a toleration for all errors. Or if it be capable of any other sense, it must be like that as the Lord is said to have moved David to number the people, or that Revelation 17, verse 17, quote, God hath put it in their hearts to fulfill his will, and to agree and give their kingdom unto the beast, unquote. But to bless God and thank the tyrant for his wicked project, as deliberate and purposed by men, I say is near unto blasphemy. And again, where they say they are firmly resolved by the help of God so to demean themselves as his majesty may find cause, rather to enlarge than to diminish his favors, this in effect is as great blasphemy as if they had said they resolved by the help of God to be as unfaithful, time-serving, and silent ministers as ever plagued the church of God. For no otherwise can they demean themselves, so as he may find cause to enlarge his favors toward them, it being no way supposable that his enlarging his favors can consist with their faithfulness. But if they discover any measure of zeal against Antichrist, he will quickly diminish them. Thus far I have compendiously deduced the account of the progress and prosecution of the testimony of this church to the present state thereof, as it is concerted and contended for by the reproached remnant now only persecuted, which I hope this pretended liberty shall be so far from obscuring and interrupting, that it shall contribute further to clear it, and engage them more to constancy in it, and induce others also to countenance it, when they shall see the sad effects of this destructive snare, which I leave to time to produce, and hope that as the former representation of their cause will conciliate the charity of the unbiased, so an account of their sufferings thereupon will provoke them to sympathy, to which I now proceed. Part 2. Containing a brief account of the persecution of the last period, and of the great suffering whereby all the parts of its testimony were sealed. The foregoing deduction, being the first thing I proposed to be discussed in the method of this essay, hath now swelled to such a bulk that the last period of it doth, in a manner, swallow up what I intended to have said on the second, because it gives grounds to gather the methods and measures that our adversaries have managed for the ruin of this witnessing remnant, and also discover some special steps of their sufferings within these 27 years past, under the tyranny of both the brothers. It will now be the more easy to glean the gradations of the means and machines used by this Popish, Prelatical, and malignant faction to raise the work of Reformation, and to build their babble of popery and slavery on the ruins thereof, and to aggregate an account in belief of the great sufferings of the faithful.